I appreciate everyone coming out today. This is the second of 3 forums to discuss home rule. I see some familiar faces from the last one, so I appreciate you coming out again, getting more information. I want to let you know right off the bat that I am here acting in my capacity as the city administrator. So as far as what's allowed to be advocated for or presenting information, I will just be acting as a city administrator, presenting information about home rule, not advocating one way or another. Any other elected official or employee here is acting as private citizens, and just to clarify and make that distinction. The mayor also sends his regrets for not being able to be here on this one. He just had knee replacement surgery, so he didn't think he'd be a lot of fun to be around today. So we are also streaming this live on Facebook, and at the end we will have the opportunity, so anyone watching, save your questions or post them on there, and we'll go ahead and address the questions at the end for people who are unable to make it. We want to make this as available to as many people as possible. The purpose of this is to provide information to the public. There's a lot of information out there, as you've probably seen, a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately, as you've probably seen as well. So we want to make sure the voters are informed on what home rule is, what the impact is, and have an opportunity for feedback to address any questions or concerns that you may have. And then at the end of this, like I said, we'll be taking comments both online and from the public, so we'll try and allow for as much time as that, as we can on that. So currently, I'll get to what home rule is and what it allows. Under the current law, we are only allowed to do what the state allows us to. All of our authority comes from the state, from the Illinois Constitution, and we're limited by their statutes as to what authority we have. So there's a lot of issues that come up, a lot of challenges we're trying to address. We talk with our attorneys, we talk with the public, we talk with everyone we can, and a lot of times the answer is, you can't do that, you're not home rule. So we're operating under what's called Dillon's rule right now, which says the only authority you have is what the state allows you. Home rule flips that around, and it says we're going to allow the local officials to have authority unless the state says you don't. So there are things that we don't have authority over, like defining what constitutes a felony and what punishments there are for that. We wouldn't be able to issue debt beyond 40 years because we don't want to take on debt and say we're going to spread it out over the next 100 years for the city. But other than that, it basically says if you want to do it, unless the state says you can't, you can. So we'll talk about what questions and concerns, and because that does bring up questions and concerns for a lot of people. But basically the benefit of that is taking local issues and local challenges and putting the authority in the hands of the local officials to deal with those. Agree or not, there's been a lot of issues with the state of Illinois, and a lot of the municipalities are left to deal with that from the decisions that are made downstate. This shifts that control back to a local level and puts it in the hands of the officials that you elect, and basically kind of allows the public electorate to dictate the direction that the cities can go. We want to talk about how we got here. For anyone that's been at the budget workshops, and I know I've seen a few of you there, we've had many of them unfortunately, or have seen them online, you can attest to the financial situation that the city is currently in. And it's not an unusual story for a lot of municipalities in Illinois, or a lot of municipalities across the country. But there are some extenuating circumstances that brought us to this point. The ball field, as much as we don't want to talk about it, or is a taboo word around here, it's a reality. We spent a lot of money trying to get a tourist attraction in here, and unfortunately it didn't go the way that it was anticipated. We've also issued debt for operating expenses. Back in 2012, we had some budgetary issues facing us, and to make payroll, to make operating expenses, we issued debt for that. Well, just like a mortgage, that creates a monthly or an annual debt service payment, that becomes part of your budget moving forward. So that's about $250,000 a year that we have to spend on that, on those bonds for operating expenses. We also utilized, for some of our budget purposes in the past, there was a time where we had funds that we had to put aside for the pensions, and we did not put those funds into the pension. Instead, we entered into an agreement with them to basically pay those pension funds back over a period of time. Rather than financing with an external agency, we basically borrowed from ourselves, but that added to the budget. That added to a payment to the budget. So those were done by those were decisions made by prior staff, prior administrators, prior councils, agree with or not at the time they made the decision, and we have to deal with those now. Whatever the outcome is, we can talk about those all day long, but we have to address the situation and try and figure out how to move forward. So that's where we're at. We're looking at about a $700,000 to $800,000 deficit with an initial fund deficit of about $400,000. So we're looking at about $1.2 million shortfall that we need to try and figure out how to fill. And that takes us to what we would do if we had home rule. I'll cover what we're going to do with it if we get home rule, and then I'll also address what's going to happen if we are unable to get this. At prior council meetings, there was a plan adopted. I don't know if, was it 2 meetings ago? Or it might have been the last meeting. To talk about what we would do with the funds. Well, either way, it was either last meeting or the meeting before where we said, if we got home rule, we wanted to be transparent about what we would do with the funds and how we would get the funds. So the council adopted a plan for what we would do, and it would consist of additional officers to address some of our crime issues. We would also utilize funds to pay down debt and pension obligations. Our pension obligations, just like again, all municipalities in the state, they're continuing to grow, they're continuing to be a burden on us. And the more we have to put in every year because of underfunding or minimum funding of those, that's less money available for general operations. So if we can pay down those obligations, think of it like a credit card. If you have a $5,000 credit card bill, you might only make the minimum payment every month, but that interest continues to accumulate and the balance continues to grow. And if you're only making the minimum payment, it's going to take you forever to get out of that debt. And that minimum payment is also going to continue to grow every year, which means you have less money available for your lifestyle, your daily living. So we want to try and pay down, we want to do more than the minimum to start getting us out of those obligations. And then the council also decided that we'd have funds for additional infrastructure. You all know, and we hear about it all the time, the current status of water mains, the current status of streets. We're aware of this situation. We're aware of the challenges that there are. I was talking with the Public Works Director a couple weeks ago, and we'll talk about it in the taxation piece, but the cost to do a block of street and sidewalk in the city is about $80,000. And a lot of people don't realize that when they say, I pay high taxes, fix my street. An average person that, let's say you pay $6,000 in taxes, the city gets about $800 of that, which means we'd have to take 100% of those taxes, that $800, for 100 years to cover the cost of doing the street and sidewalk for that block. Now that puts it in perspective on what we collect versus the services we have to do. It doesn't alleviate that we have the obligation to maintain those infrastructures, but that's the challenge that we're facing. So we would be looking at using those additional funds to either leverage against grants, bonds, or other means of matching for infrastructure purposes. We would also look into crime-free housing as a measure to address some of the challenges we have in the city. Now what that does is it basically puts a burden on landlords to make sure we have good residents in the city of Zion. It allows us to require lease addendums saying, hey, if you have people that are committing felonies or certain tiers of crimes, that you cannot rent in the city of Zion, or you're required to address and take responsibility for those tenants. We currently can't do that without home rule authority, which is a big challenge that we have. Again, when we address some of the concerns, there are criminal issues that we have in the city, and we're trying to address those with the tools that are in our toolbox, and we're patching together solutions to the best of our ability. This gives us access to more tools. The final thing that we'd look at was into possible housing authority measures and additional code compliance measures that we could have access to under home rule. This allows us to have more teeth to our current enforcement. Right now, if we have code compliance violations, we can issue tickets. They can be ignored. We can issue more tickets. They can be ignored. We can only get to a point where we could foreclose on that property down the road, in which case the city is now owner of a proud rundown property that has all kinds of code violations, which if we demoed, that costs money. That's additional burden on the city. With home rule, we're allowed to have more teeth to those ordinances. We hear a lot that, okay, I got a ticket, but the house across the street has long grass, or they have a roof caving in, and the city's not doing anything about that. I assure you that that's not the case, but if we're issuing tickets and they ignore them and they don't comply, there's really not a whole lot that we can do to compel them to address that situation. So the people that get the tickets, that address the issues, they feel like they're being picked on, but they're the good residents that are addressing the issues. So home rule allows us to address that a little longer, or a little more aggressively. Now, to do all of this, what we were looking at is an increased sales tax. Council talked about what they would do if we got home rule, and this is how we would implement that. Home rule allows, and we'll talk about this again as one of the concerns, a lot of access to taxing authority. The council decided that the only interest was in a sales tax. That would get us about $1.7 million additional revenue a year to address our current deficit and to address the pay down of some of the pensions and the debts, as well as some of the infrastructure and other items that we wanted to address. The reason they were looking at sales tax as an option is they are very sensitive to the high taxes, the high property taxes within the city. And the sales tax is a way of accessing revenue, but sharing the burden to more than just Zion residents. That's to Winthrop Harbor, Beach Park, Wadsworth, anyone who comes here and shops, anyone who comes here from the hospital, that eats, and it's not revenue from just Zion residents. If it was property taxes to get this revenue, that's solely 100% on the backs of the residents. We're trying to minimize that impact. The increased sales tax does not apply to certain items. It does not apply to groceries, and it does not apply to certain medical devices. It does apply to alcohol, I think soda, soft drinks, as well as other intangible property. If you're going and buying a humidifier at Walmart or something like that. So we're talking about a 1 to 1.5% sales tax. So on a $100 purchase, you're talking $1 or $1.50 versus an increase on your property taxes, which you see lump sum. So weighing the pros and cons, that was the decision to try and, like I said, minimize the impact and spread out the cost not only to Zion, other than Zion residents, but to spread it out throughout the year as well. So that's what we would do if we had home rule status, but what would happen if we did not obtain the home rule status? As the mayor said in prior presentations, as the council has said at meetings, we will balance the budget if we don't have home rule status. We'll do it either way. We have to balance the budget. There's not an option. And there's only two ways to balance the budget. It's either increased revenues. Again, we've looked at all the revenues we can. A lot of it is out of our control. Sales tax, income tax, replacement taxes, that's all state assessed and allocated to us. We can't increase those items. The only item we have control over is fees and property taxes. So if we can't access revenues, the only way is through expenses. We've had years of budget challenges. We've done reorganizations. We've done reduced staffing through attrition. We've offered early retirement incentives to try and reduce salaries at the top. we've implemented a lot of these to get through recent years. What we're left with is all the office supplies and gas that we can cut to fill squad cars and everything. That's all been minimized. We're left with salaries and benefits as the biggest parts of our budgets. And unfortunately, police, fire, and public works are the biggest portions of our budget. We need to cut about 10% to fill this deficit and to be able to move forward. And unfortunately, there's no way to cut 10% of those departments without impacting services to residents. So what we wanted to do was present an option to the public. We always have the option, we always had that option to cut, and we have to this point. But we're at a kind of a critical mass that any additional cuts are going to impact residents. And we could have either cut those, which I'm sure there would have been outcry for any results of that, or we can look at alternatives and say, here's another option. And we wanted to put it out to the voters. We wanted to say, this is your choice. It's not an ideal situation, but here are your options. That's what a vote's for. We'll listen to it and we'll implement based on what the public desire is for each of these options. I want to address, I've talked about some of the concerns, but I want to dig into a little more of those. As I said, we hear taxes, taxes, taxes. And I don't want to minimize that. The taxes are high in the community. And you may have seen the pie chart as you walked in. If not, take a look at it. But like I said, we're about 13% of the property tax bill. If you look at the history of what we've done, we have not increased our levy by the maximum in prior years. Being the council, the current council especially, being sensitive to the taxes to the residents, we've had the option under the current law to increase by either the lesser of the consumer price index or 5%. Some of the years, the recent years, the CPI has only been 0.7% or 0.8%. That's how much we can go up in our tax levy in that year. Well, guess what? Costs still go up 2-3%. We're only able to get 0.7% more. But even given that, council, sensitive to the tax issue, has said, let's not go the maximum. Let's go somewhere in between, or let's try and keep our levy flat. So the concern is that with home rule, we can just increase the property tax levy to whatever we want, as much as we want. And while that is a home rule authority under the council, or under the law, all we can ask is that you look at prior history and actions that have been taken. And these are your elected officials. You elected them because you trust them, hopefully. And you trust the staff and you trust the administration that they put in place. And past action, again, what's a disclaimer, past results are not an indicator of future, but that's all you have to go off of is the trust that they're taking your issues to heart. We looked for alternatives in taxation as well. Home rule is an all or nothing situation. I approached Senator Bush, I approached Representative Jessel, and I said, is there a way to do a hybrid option of home rule where we can get the authority for either just the sales tax piece or at least these other powers for crime-free housing, for housing authority, for ordinances, without the taxing authority? They said, they talked with their legislators and they said there is no hybrid option currently in the state of Illinois. It's all or nothing. You take the authority or you don't. So we were trying to figure out if we could even limit our own authority to address these concerns. They did say, however, you could adopt a resolution where you say, we won't take advantage of this authority. The problem with that is it's a non-binding resolution. Again, we adopted it. We took that and said, we'll operate under, we adopted a resolution, and I think it's here if you want a copy of it. We'll operate under current property tax law. We'll hold public hearings for any new fees or taxes that might go into place. We'll listen to the public on that. It is non-binding, but we took every legal option available to us to try and not only handcuff the current council, but make it more difficult for future councils to abuse these powers. The mayor talked in the prior meeting and said for every elected official that's running for office, that should be a question that you ask them. What is your intent for use of home rule powers? If that's your primary concern, make sure they're aware of it. Hold them accountable. You're in charge of that. That's the point of the elections. For everyone who abuses that, there's elections every 2 years. Hold them accountable. You can elect new officials in. That's the only way you can address, like I said, the abuse, or if somebody says what their intent is and goes against that. Like I said, we try to do everything. If we could have gone further, we would have, to try and assure the public what our intent is of this. But this is as far as we could go with it. One of the other concerns that I've heard about is that, for lack of a better way, why are we going to give them more authority and more funds? They can't even manage or handle the ones they've got. Or there's crime and that they're not dealing with right now, or there's code compliance that they're not dealing with right now. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Without home rule authority for access to a lot of other resources and tools, right now we're basically trying to hammer a nail in with a screwdriver. And we'll do it. We'll get that nail in. It might be a little crooked and it might take a little longer. But home rule is saying, give us a hammer. Give us the right tool to address these challenges, to address these concerns. The tools we have aren't enough to overcome what we need to address our housing and our crime issues primarily. So right now we're understaffed citywide. We're operating lean. We're operating with less than a lot of communities that are our size and with the challenges we have. We're reactionary at this point. We're at a priority-based system. Our police have to respond to major issues, and as a result of that, maybe the overnight parking or the no city stickers don't get as much attention as they need to. Again, it doesn't alleviate our responsibility to enforce those, but it goes on a priority system where if you're putting out fires, something has to give. And we're trying to address that going forward. Again, with having additional tools, it'll allow us to use existing resources more efficiently. We won't have to jump through all kinds of hoops to get an end result that we might be able to get with less time and less money. So we could reallocate existing resources better and then have access to more resources that can up that level of service. Obviously, like I said, if we don't get it, cuts to services are only going to exacerbate that, which, the council decided to put this on the ballot, again, to present the option to the public and say, we have two options here, and we'll listen to whichever you vote for, and we'll implement based on that. Obviously, we don't want to go down that road if we can help it, but we wouldn't be putting this on the ballot if we had a better alternative. There's a lot of solutions that have been proposed out there, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's in private discussions. Some we've taken to heart, some we've already implemented in the past, and some you just can't due to state statute or pension laws or union contracts. So we're dealing with a lot of factors that kind of prohibit what we can and can't do to address these issues. But we've taken every step that we can to this point to try and work within our means. And with that, I would open it up to questions, concerns. Again, we're streaming live, so if anyone's watching currently, Sonalito will be happy to pass on your question to me. Chris.
Chris Kubik, Javier. I think for many years the residents have been saying, don't raise property taxes, come up with some other solution, problem solve. And I feel like this is the result of that problem solving. So I appreciate that. I also want to just state, I think trust, you mentioned trust is really important. Trust in government is kind of at a low. but I think I have a little bit more faith in the people here, not just because of who you are, but because I can know you, I can attend these meetings. In terms of leading power in the state, there's 177 representatives down there, only 2 of them are assigned to our area and not just our community. So even if I do trust them, that's 2 out of 177. I'm not going to go down to Springfield and attend their meetings. It's harder to get a hold of them. So I do like the power being in our hands. And I appreciate the council's brainstorming and problem solving with this. That being said, could you elaborate on some of the teeth that this would give you? What kind of code enforcement would you have under home rule? Couldn't people ignore the tickets under home rule? And then my other question is, if this does go badly, how hard is it to get rid of home rule?
Sure. I'll address the second part first because it's a little easier. Rockford just did this recently. They actually put on a referendum to revoke home rule authority. 2 ways to get home rule is by referendum or you have population of 25,000. I didn't say that at the beginning, but we're about 600 short as of the last census. We were 24,000 and change. So we just missed home rule in 2010 by a small margin. We would expect that our population would hit that in 2020 anyway. But we don't, by the time you get the census, it gets finalized and you're able to implement anything, we're looking at 2021, 22. A lot of damage can be done or a lot of damage can be mitigated between 2018 and 2022. But Rockford had home rule authority. They put it on for referendum through public request to put it on the ballot to revoke home rule authority, and they were successful on it. So as much as a vote to approve home rule grants the power, a vote to revoke it, it's the same process.
And that could be done within 2 years?
I believe so.
Within the next voting cycle?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Now this is more election law, that's not my expertise, but I think if a referendum's up and fails, there's a certain period of time where before you can put it back, you can't have it on every election. I don't know what the time period of that is, but there is an option to revoke that. As far as the teeth go, there are licensing options. Again, if you have outstanding fines, fees to the city, if we're talking from a rental or landlord perspective, and again, we'll have to talk the details, the very specifics on issuing licensing, how we want to do that, whether it's part of the existing structure, how to roll that out. But if there's outstanding fines, fees, violations, basically it's like licensing a business. You could make them comply to be able to license and rent. The foreclosure processes and the collection processes for home rule allow you a lot more authority as far as what you could tie that to as well. We have administrative adjudication right now where if we give somebody a ticket for a housing violation, something like that, they could come in, they have their chance to argue it, say it's not my fault, not my car, whatever the issue is. And there are actually instances where individuals are found guilty and our adjudicator will say, we're going to put $750 a day fines until you address this. We have violations out there that have accumulated up to $200,000 because they just go, I'm not dealing with it. Well, obviously we're not going to ever collect $200,000 on that property, and we look to say, once they come in, if they address it, we can work with them, we can settle this. We just want the compliance. We'd have, like I said, more ways to force collections to be able to access individual or corporate assets, or like I said, the licensing you can kind of hold over to say, comply and try and get this dealt with.
David, I believe we can also take offenders to court.
Yes.
We have an adjudicated process here, which doesn't have much of many teeth to it, but we can also take someone like that to
Right. And now you can have a court judgment against the individual as well, which comes up in a lot more places, could impact an individual a lot more than a city of Zion adjudication finding. So.
Why did Rockford just revoke home rule?
I can't speak for them. I'm not exactly sure.
Actually, that was in 1983.
Okay, but that's the only one I'm aware of that had a revocation.
Rockford and Lombard are the only cities in Illinois over 25,000 that have revoked home rule. But yeah, Rockford did it back in 1983. they've been non-home rule for the past
Okay,
30 some odd years.
okay. And I don't know what the reason was. That sounds to me more like a local issue. Maybe they didn't trust the officials. They weren't getting what they thought or what was promised. I don't know. Again, to Chris's point, the home rule, you have 5 people up here that are local, many who are here today, that have accountability you can see on a daily basis. At the state level, at the federal level, I understand there's, like you said, government trust is at a low.
Absolutely.
Their representation is not, I won't say they don't care about the city of Zion, but it's not their first priority. Whereas your local elected officials, it is. That's where the change happens. That's who you see every day, and that's who you can knock on the door, and you can come to the meetings, and you can have a direct impact on.
This meeting is being held on a Monday at 12 o'clock noon, between 12 and 2. The average working resident is not here, not represented here, cannot be represented here. But you want us to trust that you have our best interests at heart. All I've heard you say is that you want to penalize landlords for criminal tenants. How in the heck would a landlord know that the person they have moving into their building, that they're expecting to pay the rent, is a criminal?
I'll address.
How does that become my issue once they move in?
I'll address both of those. We had 3 different public forums. The last one was at 6 o'clock during a weekday to try and accommodate for people who were able to come after work. This one's at noon for the people who could maybe a little lunch hour come by. The next one is the 27th, which is on a Saturday. We took that into consideration to try and get accessibility to as many people as possible. We're also streaming it online for those who either can't make it here due to disability or just aren't able to get out. So we're trying, we took that into consideration when we scheduled these meetings to try and accommodate as many people as possible with this information. So that's the first item. Just one, I'll let you go back.
Absolutely.
I understand that you wouldn't know if somebody was a criminal or not potentially in advance. If you do background checks, if you interviews, whatever the case may be, that may help identify that. Crime-free housing says once they commit a crime, however, we ask you to help us take responsibility for that we address somebody that's committing a crime in our community. You may not know in advance, but if you know after the fact, we're asking to be good residents, just like any corporate resident, every landlord, every homeowner, take accountability for their actions in the city. We're not saying we're holding you responsible in advance. We're asking that you help us address the situation if it occurs.
And what does that mean?
That, whether it's eviction, whether it's, we would have to draft, there's a lot of crime-free housing language out there, and it's all copy and pasted from each other. It's all, but there's addendums that you put on leases that say, we're asking you to comply. It's no different than if they didn't pay their rent. You have a lease agreement that says, this is what you'll do, this is what you're responsible for. You're responsible for being a good resident in the city as well. So there's language in that contract, in that lease, that we're asking you to put in to say, this is what we're asking when you rent from me. There's, like I said, that's not something that council has adopted, but what crime-free housing allows, there's a lot of kind of boilerplate language out there that you could look at in advance.
Right, and so here's my challenge. The landlord is not the criminal. So the bite that you put in is not for the criminal, it's for the landlord. So I do all of these things you asked me to do, and the criminal, who is still the criminal, doesn't comply. I'm the one that bears the penalty, not the criminal. You're attacking the wrong individual. Help me get the criminal out of my business, out of my building, but don't attack me.
And this helps give you teeth in your contract to get them out of that building.
Why can't we just go to reasonable? If you're asking me to trust you, why can't we expect the landlord to be trusted and say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is good practice. We want to view this as best demonstrated practice. Here's what we'd like to have in our lease agreements. It's your property.
And that's great if every landlord handled their properties and held their tenants accountable the way you're looking at. But that's not reality. This is landlords that are absentee, that buy in bulk, and if people want to buy in bulk and put good tenants in here and be investors in Zion, fantastic.
Right.
But that's not the case. It's the bad apples that spoil it for everyone.
Right.
We don't have a problem with the owners that are taking responsibility for their properties, that they're keeping them up, that they're screening the tenants, that they're putting good residents in here that are part of the community. But to assume everyone is like that is just like assuming that every resident is a good resident. There's a small percentage that there's 2% of the population that's all we hear about in the news. That's who's ruining Zion. It's a small percentage. The majority of Zion residents are good, hardworking residents that obey the law, that they comply. When they forget to mow their lawn or they don't, they get a letter, they get it taken care of, no problem. But that small percentage has a larger impact on the negative future of Zion than the large does. And it's the same way with the landlords. So the ones that aren't taking responsibility, that aren't being accountable, we're asking them to. For the ones that want to be accountable, but they come up with problems with evicting tenants or getting them out of there, this helps give them a little more beef in their contract. We have instances where tenants or owners will not pay water bills because they will want to use the city as an eviction service because it's easier under the law to say, if your water's shut off, we can't have we can't have a resident without water for 72 hours, and we have to post it as occupancy prohibited. There are landlords that do that intentionally to get their tenants out. So I understand the good landlords that want to take responsibility. I applaud them, and I have no problem with that. But those aren't the ones that are impacting the city.
But you expect everyone to give up their civil liberties. And see, here's my challenge with this. I'm a veteran that has jumped out of perfectly good airplanes to fight for the civil liberties of this country. And now you're asking me to just give them up and just trust that people that I may or may not be able to make it to the meeting for will do what is right for us. And 2 years, by the way, is a long time for anyone to be under anyone's thumb. That's a long time. That's all I'm saying.
I understand, and that's why it goes to a vote. And we'll listen to the results of, if you vote no on home rule, we'll listen to that. And like I said, we'll balance the budget, and that's what we'll have to do. If you vote yes, we just want to be transparent with what the intention is, and I understand trust is in short supply these days.
Absolutely.
So I don't disregard that as well, but that's why we're putting the option out there for a vote, to listen to the public and say, how do you want to proceed? Vote yes, vote no, we'll listen, and we'll implement accordingly.
Well, and then my other challenge is I don't see how implementing a sales tax is going to help. If I know Zion has a sales tax, I just won't buy in Zion where there's no sales tax. I can go to Gurnee, I can go to Libertyville, I can go to Annie, I can go buy anywhere.
Well, Gurney's sales tax is actually higher than ours right now, and they'd be higher than ours at 8. They're 8 and are they 8% or 8.5?
8, Waukegan is 8.5%.
Wadsworth is 8.
All the communities around us have higher sales tax.
Right.
Except for Wisconsin, we can't compete with Wisconsin.
Right. So that's an argument that's used, and I get that, but at the same time, are you going to drive 15 minutes to save $1 on a purchase? And
No, I'm being honest. No,
right. So I mean, under that logic, everyone in Gurnee and Waukegan would be shopping here because we have a lower sales tax right now. We know that's not the case. They shop in Waukegan and they shop in Gurnee.
But no one would have known that if I didn't ask that question correct.
I don't know. It's on our Facebook page. It's on. I mean,
Most people wouldn't.
I know, but I understand. It's not something that is noticed. You get your property tax bill, you notice if it went up.
Right.
A sales tax is a minimal impact, a spread out impact. We're already lower than surrounding communities. To your point, it's not something that people look at when they make a decision on where they're going to shop.
Thank you.
So we're trying to be transparent with it on what we do, but to say people will go somewhere else, there might be some. But like I said, if that was the case, Waukegan and Gurnee would be shopping here. And, am I going to go drive, 15 minutes up into Kenosha to buy something and spend a half hour of time and $4 of gas to save $1 of sales tax?
Absolutely not. Thank you for clearing up that misunderstanding.
I appreciate the question.
No problem.
Mr. Brady?
Mr. Knable, first, sir, thank you for being willing to serve the country. Several questions. You mentioned the figure $250,000 for bond payments.
Correct.
In past city council meetings, you have abated at least 4 different bond payments based on motor fuel taxes and so on.
Correct.
Does that $250,000 figure include those abatements?
It does not. The $250,000 comes out of general fund dollars. The way bonds are set up, we pledge revenue sources, whether it be motor fuel tax, whether it be TIF dollars, and we say we're going to collect enough in those items to cover the bond payments. There's a provision in the bond documents that say if you don't get enough for motor fuel taxes or income taxes or TIF to make the debt payments, you can levy taxes to make up the difference. We have never levied taxes for those. We've always collected more than necessary, so we abate it and don't add that to the tax bill.
Thank you. Second, the 1.7 billion in sales tax.
Correct.
I understand the number. The state of Illinois first charges a percentage of sales tax. Who collects the sales tax? When do we get it back from the state of Illinois, if ever, the way that they have been behind on their bills? How much do they keep of that increase?
The sales tax is collected by the businesses at the time of purchase, and I believe it's either 7 or 7.25% currently. The state keeps a good portion of that. I want to say 5.25%, and don't quote me on all these because but Regional Transit Authority has a piece of that. 1% is currently the sales tax of that 7%, 1% goes to the city. The state collects that, the business fills out sales tax forms, sends it to the state. We get it about 2 to 3 months after they process all that, figure out what our share is, and distribute it back to us.
So it is returned
The 1% comes to us on a monthly basis.
reasonably promptly.
Yes, yes.
It's not 2 years behind.
As far as state timelines go, that's prompt.
The resolution which you cited and
Yes.
provided a copy, can that be made binding? Legally binding?
It can't. That's what I was saying before, is that I asked our legislators, is there something we can do that limits our authority on this? And they said, nope. Home rule, here's your authority. You can adopt this resolution, but it can't be made binding. That's why I said we tried to take every step legally available to us to limit us as much as possible. It will make it more difficult for future councils. They'll have to publicly come along and not adopt that resolution or overturn that resolution. So we're trying to put that in place to, at least put a speed bump in it, in the road, and to make it so that, to your point, if the question's not asked, that it doesn't happen, they have to publicly overturn that resolution. So we're trying to implement everything we can legally to address those concerns.
Then, sir, if home rule is adopted and so on, what would be the effective date of any tax increases, whatever it might, sales tax, whatever? What would be the effective date, and when would the city start seeing the money?
We probably wouldn't see it until our next fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs May 1st through April 30th. So by the time the vote goes in, it gets recorded at the county. You do have to have public hearings to say we're going to increase the sales tax. That'll then go to the state. They'll have to change everything, issue new forms to businesses. You're probably looking at a 6-month delay from election to collection.
That's sort of the question I asked when the young lady from Ansel Plank, the other various taxing bodies on your pie chart are not affected by it. They tax whatever they want.
They have property tax. They're under the same property tax laws. There's some slight variations as we are. We have no control over the schools. There's completely, that's another piece of misinformation out there, is that the park, the township, the school districts, they have completely separate boards, completely separate taxing authority from the city. We don't have control over what they levy, but they're under the same cap as far as we are. But if they go up 2%, if our levy is $6 million or $7 million and theirs is $26 million, 2% of 26 million is a lot more than 2% of 7 million when they use that percentage increase. So those same maximums and those same limitations are in place for the other taxing bodies, however.
Can those various bodies be taken over by the city? To say, we're going to abolish the school board, we're going to take charge of it, the city's going to take charge of it.
I don't know. I don't know. There's been discussion about consolidation. I think, again, that resides at a state level. We have not looked into taking control over those taxing bodies. Other than the township, there was a study that was done, I think last year, on benefits of consolidation of the township with the city and what that would save and what that would bring. And because, I mean, they're about 2%, I think, of the taxing, the whole pie. So obviously, even if you eliminated the township levy of 2%, a 2% reduction in your taxes is not where the big issue is. But the savings that was generated, it was decided was not worth the cons. But that was the only one that was looked into as far as consolidation.
I thank you, sir, for your time and your courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. Bremner. Any other questions, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
How much of a sales tax increase are you looking at?
I think it's been discussed between 1% and 1.5%. So like I said, on a $100 purchase, you'd be looking at $1 to $1.50. Chris?
What about the possible deterrent effect? Do you think landlords or potential businesses would be deterred by the city having more teeth, more enforcement over the landlords? Or do you think hearing about an increase in sales tax would scare away potential businesses?
I don't know about the business mentality side of thing. I mean, I've heard discussion out there about, well, if sales tax is increased, I'm going to flee or whatever. But again, they'll have to weigh that out as the pros and cons. I don't think it's been proven in other municipalities that have increased the sales tax and are already higher than us that's not really true. That you don't have the flee to. Again, if that was the case, all the businesses in Waukegan that are 8.5% sales tax would have been flocking and filling up storefronts in Zion because we're only 7. You know, there's pros and cons there. It's not a cost to the business. It might be lost opportunity of sales,
That's what I mean.
but I think it's a minimal impact. Again, if we can try and get some other things implemented and try and do some property tax control and try and address some crime issues, things of that nature, that's going to be more beneficial to businesses than any downside. But I can't speak on behalf of the businesses, and I'm sorry you had another comment there as well.
But it was similar with the landlords. If they find out, if potential landlords who were going to invest in this community find that the city now has more enforcement authority, do you think that will deter them from investing in the city in that way?
Gut feel, I think it would deter the ones who are trying to get away with if they're taking care of their properties. Our building department and our officers work very well with people that want to come in, want to address something. Hey, I got this letter. What do I need to do to address this? I'll be right with you in a second, sir. So I don't think the individuals who are good neighbors would really have anything to worry about. Again, you don't have to worry about a law that's in place unless you plan on violating the law. It may, but I would think, again, the crime issues, the property value issues that have, been impacted because of crime, it would actually be more beneficial for investors in the long term than to get those things under control and protect their assets as investors than the current way of doing things. You had a comment on that?
I think our challenge is we're looking at landlords, all landlords as being equal. And an absentee landlord, to me, is not the same as an individual that is a landlord in that community, that buys a property, that is a part of that community. They care about that community. That person may have bought 50 properties in this community and never seen any of them and doesn't care about any of them. All he's in it is to make a buck. You can't treat, my challenge is, we want to paint everyone with the same brush, and they're not. The challenge is, you're treating both landlords like they're the same, and they're not. Decouple the category. Treat absentee landlords and landlords that are not absentee differently, because they are different.
I agree with you 100%. Under current tools in our toolbox, we don't have the ability to differentiate. We are only allowed to say, here's how you can treat them, and it's the same across the board. We could do changes in licensing. If we do licensing, we may be able to say, look, there's a licensing fee, and if you didn't have any violations in the past year, we could waive that. If you're a good tenant, if you're a responsible landlord, there are things that you can do to reward or encourage individuals that are responsible investors looking to improve the community. Currently, we can't do that because, again, the legal answer always becomes, you're not home rule. It's discriminatory if you treat this person different than this under state constitutions versus local legislative issues.
Fair enough.
So,
And then I'm done. So here's my challenge then with home rule. Bring me all of that. Here is exactly what we intend to do with home rule. Here is how we're going to distinguish between absentee landlords and landlords that are here investing in this community. Here is how we're going to distinguish between investors in this community. Are you looking to make a buck off of us, or are you looking to build in our community? And then to say, here's what we're recommending to you. And that's what you're not doing. You're giving you no clarity as to when we give you this power, what you're going to do with this power. I'd like you to come forward and say, hey, here's this power that I'm asking you for, and here's exactly what I want to do with it. Here's exactly when I want to do with it. Here's our implementation plan. Here's our rollout plan. And that's what no one is giving me. And then plus, when you do this in the middle of the day, when most of the residents are at home, I appreciate you streaming it. What about those millions of seniors, those thousands of seniors rather, in our own community that aren't on email, that aren't on Facebook, that don't use social media? Don't they deserve to hear about it? Haven't they built this community? Aren't we standing on their shoulders right now? Don't they have a voice and a say? And I don't think it's right. That's all I expect from those that go into public service, is that you actually serve the public. That would serve me.
And
in this community.
I appreciate that, and I'll work with Commissioner McKinney in the building department, see if we can get something more detailed for the October 27th meeting.
Absolutely.
We do have discussions into Barton, Carmel, and the Zion Senior Cottages to see if we can schedule time where we can have a little coffee chat, explain the situations. So we've considered the seniors as well. Also today, we just put the home rule FAQ sheet. We got that translated into Spanish as well and put on the website to make sure we're trying to, again, address all aspects of the community because they all have a stake in this.
I'm Lori Mattias with Remax, and I have a question about the authority. If it passes, do you have the authority then to limit the number of Section 8 vouchers?
I don't know, and we try to be very careful, especially when talking about Section 8. We don't have a problem with Section 8. A Section 8 tenant can be just as bad as any other tenant. So,
Or just as good.
right, or just as good, absolutely. There are plenty of Section 8 tenants here that have lived here 20, 30 years, and you'd never know it. They take care of their properties, they take pride in the community, and they're good neighbors. So, but there are studies that show Section 8 tenants, low-income tenants, there is additional resources that are required to provide in a community. And again, we don't have a problem.
We have a large majority of the vouchers here.
Yeah, I believe I'll get to you in 1 second. The stat that we looked at is we have, not counting, I think, North Chicago and Waukegan, we have 4% of the county's population, but we have about 40% of the vouchers. We're being asked to shoulder a large burden that I don't think benefits the community, and I don't think it benefits those voucher recipients. I mean, the goal would be to bring the quality of life for recipients and have them have access to amenities, to food, shopping, transportation that pulls everyone up. When you I kind of use the equation of you put 2 5-gallon buckets of water out there and you put 40 drops of dye, red dye in this one, and you put 1 drop of dye over here, you don't notice that drop of dye in the 5-gallon bucket. You notice it's changed the tint of this one though. And those resources can be absorbed countywide and result in a better distribution and better access, like I said, to resources and quality of life if they're not concentrated into a single area. And that's just, socioeconomic studies, but whether we would look at limiting that or have access to that, I don't know that that's been discussed. We've looked at housing authorities. We've had discussions with Waukegan. We've had discussions with other organizations that have housing authorities, and they say, be careful what you wish for. It doesn't mean we wouldn't look at the authority and see what access we'd have.
Do you have the authority to do that is my question. You do have the authority to do it if you pass the home rule.
I believe we do.
We have the authority to create a
Housing authority, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just have some more questions, housing related.
Real quick, Commissioner McKinney, he was gonna respond to.
No, I wanted to address a couple of the issues, Pastor Williams, about the landlords. The city is not trying to discriminate against the landlords or penalize you. When we had this form for earlier, I want to say it's a couple of years ago, about the rental certification inspection program, that was tied into the voucher system as well. And our goal was to work with the landlords because we were being told, I got bad tenants. How can I control my tenants? That is the responsibility of the property owner. I've rented homes before. So in my lease agreements, I've been very specific about what is to go on or not go on within my property, because it's investment for me that impacts the entire community. What we are seeking with this is also an opportunity to work with the Lake County Housing Authority, which we haven't had the success in. It's not about so much the amount of vouchers. David mentioned a very important point, deconcentration. When you have the vouchers going into one section, it's not a good representation of the community, not so much a representation, but you're not spreading it out. There's a new executive director of the Lake County Housing Authority that we've recently met with that is on board with how we see the vision for our cities to work with the landlords as well as the city. So it's, when you talk about the high number of vouchers, I don't like to paint people with a broad brush in that regard, because my family moved here, we were essentially Section 8. My mother, fortunately, was able to buy a house that I still live in. That's a beautiful property. We are trying to make sure that with the landlords, getting the backgrounds and getting good people in there, and our primary concern is our citizens having a decent housing, safe and sanitized. And we talk about life and safety issues. The crime-free housing, what we found and what's been determined nationwide is when you have low-income housing or housing where we have 60% of our housing here is being rented, you also have the opportunity, not to say that all people are criminals that are moving in, but people use some of these housing facilities to do illegal activities. So the leases become critical to helping the landlord keep their properties values, because when we have crime and we have bad properties, you lose your property value, you lose the reputation of our city, which I think we have lost. So we're trying to be on page and sync with everyone, landlords, and especially with the landlords that receive the vouchers to give to their tenants. What they haven't done, some of them, not all of them, some of them have not complied with the city's inspection. They're supposed to get 2 inspections. One from the Lake County Housing Authority, the second from the city of Zion. Some of the landlords have foregone that and not getting the inspection by the city, and as a result, they're giving out the vouchers essentially illegally. We're trying to cut down on that, decrease that, so that we make sure tenants have a good place to live.
Yeah, there's not enough housing for Section 8. Every time I put it out on the market for rent, my phone blows up. The first 24 hours, I'll get 1,000 phone calls. They're all wanting to know if my landlord's willing to take the Section 8 voucher, and I just think it's the saddest thing. But I'm a landlord, I wouldn't mind adding that addendum to my lease at all, because I already know I'm not gonna rent it to a criminal.
Right,
And I already run it
exactly.
through a background check, and everybody should be doing that, in my opinion. But my fear is that it's not gonna be, the criminal's name is not gonna be on the lease. It's gonna be somebody else's name.
Well, and that's part of the working with the Lake County Housing Authority does. And if we're in sync with them as a team with this new director, if you're on that lease and you have criminal activity in that house, you lose your voucher.
Well, yeah,
That
I
puts a
wasn't
lot
really-
more, that puts a lot more bite in it.
Yeah, and I
for-
wasn't thinking that the criminals are all in the Section 8 vouchers. That's
Yeah,
not-
no. Yeah, I'm just saying.
I'm just saying that as a landlord, I could rent, my home out, and then there could be a crime in there, and I could have ran it through the background check and got a really nice tenant, and it was the grandson or something, bringing in all the riffraff, something along those lines. I don't want to be,
Right, and now Granny's
In
out on the
trouble.
streets.
yeah, but I'd like to,
So,
I'm just saying, I'm not arguing with you. I'm saying, just like she's saying, it's far more complex
Yes.
than you're making it.
Yes.
And I'm just saying, and so, to just ask me to give up my civil liberties to make it easier for you, in essence, that's a tough call.
Robert, how is that?
I'm just saying.
different than civil liberties? I don't understand that piece of it.
You're telling me now that you're basically saying now you're going to say who and can and cannot move into this community based upon their income.
no, that's not it at all.
That's what I'm hearing.
No.
That's the challenge I'm hearing. We will limit the number of vouchers that come in because we already have.
We never said that. She asked if that wasn't an
Do
option.
they have the authority? And I heard you say, yes, they
Yeah.
have the authority. I also heard it said several times that we have a disproportionate number in this community, and we need to figure out a way to cycle that throughout the remainder of the community. And I get that. And so my point is, show me how you've already planned to cycle this throughout the community before you bring it to us. Don't figure it out on the fly. That's all I'm asking, and I think that's a reasonable request.
Well, yeah, I don't think we're figuring it out on the fly. I just think there's a lot of issues, and you have to be careful about the ramifications of those, just like when we
Exactly.
told everybody they had to convert their home back to a single family, if they were a multi-family, and they had to convert it back. A lot of people couldn't afford to do that, and they lost their home, and the foreclosures went up, and then that's when all these investors came in and bought them all, and they don't care about who's renting. And
Well, we'll put together more details on it by the next
And
meeting.
here's my thing, and you forced their hand. They had to comply or they had to give up their home because they could not transfer it over. And I'm saying, let's just take a more compassionate approach before we just assume we're right.
And I don't think they're looking at
Right.
all of us. I think they're just looking at the problem.
The comment that we had at that forum where we talked about the rental inspection, we had the gym filled with landlords and everything. I don't know if you were there, but there was discussion after that, and landlords were coming to us saying, you're doing this, you're putting a burden on me, everything. And we said, well, you're putting a burden on the resources when there's criminals in here and everything. And they said, that's the city's problem. We got that a lot from landlords. That's the city's problem.
Or we don't care about how they live.
Right. So that's the ones that we're concerned with. They're putting tenants in your community, they're buying properties for a quick buck, to point of your words, and they don't care about the impact that it has on the community as a whole. We're trying to say, look, residents, good landlords, good businesses that want to be here, that want to invest here, and have their property appreciate in value and make a good living as a result of it, fantastic. Doors are open for business. But the ones that say, that's your problem. My property, I bought that property for $30,000. I got 3 years out of it. It's run down. I'll buy the one next door and abandon that one as long as my cash flow keeps going. Those are the ones that we're trying to address that I think, and again, we'll have to put the plan together, but we're not looking to impact the good eggs. We're looking to say the ones that don't care, that say they don't care, that say it's the city's problem, we just want to hold them to the same standard as we expect for everyone that's already complying.
And we're not trying to limit people by their income that come into our city without question. And that's why there's a greater effort to work with the housing authority, which has programs that are designated for low-income individuals to help expose them to opportunities within the community and to break the cycle of the condition that they find themselves in. And I'd be more than willing to sit with you and chat with you about all of your concerns.
Do you have any questions?
I have another question about
Sure.
assessed values. And so with a home rule that does pass, do you have any plans to maybe check the numbers, make sure they're all correct? Maybe assess a couple properties a little higher that probably should be assessed a little higher?
That, the assessor is all handled, the township assessor is out of Zion Township, which is completely independent of the city. So Larry Wickets is the current assessor. They go through a process, I think it's called the quadrennial. Every 4 years, they're able to look at everything and say what needs to go up, what needs to go down based on market overall versus something like at a point in time, someone might come along and say, okay, we had this a lot when we had the vacancies and there was the market downturn, is people were abandoning or banks were selling them for a fraction of the market value, and those became comparable values now for everyone else, and everyone's values came down.
Well, I can tell you this, from my little house in Zion that I bought 40 years ago for $55,000, I saw it go up to 130 in '06 when I became a realtor. And I saw it go back down to 65 when the market crashed. And now.
And that wasn't unique to Zion. Everyone took,
Over 100.
everyone took a value hit during that time. There's a lot of communities that are lagging.
Turned around,
Right.
I just want everybody to
Right.
know, it's a lot more sales than is for sale, the inventory.
We've been seeing 8 to 10% increases in value over the past couple years. I think we're going to see that again.
Like 3 to 5 is normal. So
Right.
that's-
So we're lagging a little behind, but we're seeing those jumps to recover to the market. But that is completely independent of the city. That's handled through the township assessor. Yes.
So, this is exactly on it, but how long do they think the litigation for the nuclear plant is going to last?
We've been trying that for 3 years now, I think, maybe 4 years. I don't know. It's federal politics, so your guess is as good as mine, but that doesn't, I'll just let you know we're continue to push that boulder uphill and we're going to keep fighting it. We haven't given up on that. There's a couple things that we're looking at, trying to, and the mayor talked about it in prior meetings. We're looking for home runs for revenue, and we've been trying to do that for years, as well as the little wins here and there. Everyone talks about one more item that I didn't address in here. Everyone talks about economic development being a key, and it absolutely is important. But one example that I gave to the mayor that kind of put it in perspective for him is we had the hospital expansion, $85 million expansion, of which about $50 million of that was beds, machinery, equipment. So there was $35 million of real property that got added to the tax rolls. The city got about $300,000 in taxes from that. $300,000, which means we would need 2 of those size expansions to address a budget deficit. Absolutely, the Dairy Queen, the Wendy's, the Little Caesars that's going in, those will help add to the tax base, but you would need hundreds of those to increase the tax base enough to make an impact. So we're looking at that because every bit helps, and we're spending every day pushing those efforts to try and get those stores filled, because that does mean jobs, that does mean sales tax, that draws people here to buy the homes, but it's a two-prong approach. We've been working on that for 3 years, and we're going to keep working on it. I wish I could give you a time frame, because I'd love to be able to, that would be a press release tomorrow if I had it. Yes.
I understand that if home rule does not pass, we may need to cut services like fire and police. And if home rule does pass, we may be able to increase those services. When was the last time that those were increased or decreased, and how did that affect the local crime rate?
Over the past 10 years, looking at the number of full-time police, fire, actually citywide in every department, we're down personnel. There have not been increases in quite a long time. The only increase we had recently was in the fire department. We got a grant to hire 3 full-time firefighters where they cover 80% of all salary, benefits, things of that nature. So we were able to get 3 full-time fire personnel for 20% of the cost, which you have to take advantage of those when you can. As far as a direct correlation between crime, that's hard to say.
Correlation to causation.
Right. I mean, sometimes more police doesn't translate into less crime. There's a bunch of factors that go into that. I mean, it's housing, it's values, it's, a whole bunch of things. But obviously, if there's more patrols on the street, more visual presence of officers, that can be a deterrent. But there has not been an increase in quite a while. It's actually been the opposite. We've had to deal with budget up to this point. Before we hit this critical mass of having to put this out there, make this decision, we've been able to address budget issues through retirements and not replacing, and attrition in all the departments. So we're actually down personnel.
I have been working with Deputy Chief Henderson on a number of community initiatives. I know he's always said that he wishes that more officers could be freed up to do more of the community building things. Like there was a thing that they did with the schools, and the kids would just flock to the officers at the schools. And he wishes that they would have more of an opportunity to do that. So whether it's home rule or not, I hope we can figure out something to allow
I
that
wish
to
they
happen.
could too.
That could prevent so much, and it's
Yeah.
just good for the community.
Absolutely. No, I agree.
Can I ask a question about landlords? And I don't want to take the floor from anybody else.
I think Mike was going to have a question real quick, and we'll bounce right back.
That Chris asked as well, and I know the discussion has gone to landlords, but what was an important point for the city council is when we looked at the budget deficit that we were facing, we certainly could, as David said, could have made those cuts, and we would have made cuts in the services provided by our police department, fire department, and public works, which are our 3 biggest departments. We were looking for solutions, ways not to reduce our city employees that way, and one of them was home rule, where we could get some more revenue coming in, so we wouldn't have to make those cuts. And I'd like everybody to know that that's what's on the line here. We will have to reduce our police department, our fire department, and our public works department to have a balanced budget. Home rule will give us the ability to have some more revenue come in so that we can meet the budget and keep those our city employees employed doing what they love to do. So that's an important consideration. It's a decision that we didn't want just the city council to make, because it's a huge decision. If we were to just say, well, we're going to make those cuts and reduce police, fire, and public works, I think we would have an outcry from the public because of that, which is why we're putting it to this vote. So you need to keep in mind that's the consequence of not voting for home rule. We'll lose employees in police, fire, and public works.
And if it doesn't work, it comes back to vote every 2 or 3 years? Is that what you said? I'm sorry.
No. I mean, we could put it back on for referendum. I want to say it's 2 years after. If it doesn't pass, you could put it back on for referendum. At that point, we'd be at 2020 and be looking at population anyway. But like I said, we're looking at the voice of the public. That's the point of voting. Get out there and vote. And we'll make the decisions one way or another based on the results of the votes. I mean, it can be put up at a future time. Other referendums could be proposed as well. Either way, it would always have to go before the public. Chris, you had another?
Do you think adding home rule would improve the relationship with landlords? Because as you mentioned, they're not a monolithic group. And I know there are some bad apples and there are some good apples. Do you think the extra authority and flexibility that home rule would give us would allow us to improve relations and work with them?
I would definitely hope it would. Like I said, the goal would be to get the tools in place to give them more rights to manage their property as well. And I just had a call the other day saying, from a homeowners association saying, we want to change our bylaws and add services for the city to be able to either come on private property or whatever to help us enforce this, because we don't have that ability right now. They're looking to the city to help enforce some of the rules so that they can keep their properties nice. They can have some additional teeth that they don't have right now. It also gives us the opportunity to, like I said, we do it now with our rental inspection. If you have a clean inspection, you have a longer period of time before we have to come back in than if you don't. So there are ways to say you're a good landlord, you're a good resident of the city. We can acknowledge that. We can help you. If you're not, we don't want the good landlords to have a black eye over the bad. And like to your point, they're getting grouped in right now because of the bad apples. We'd like to make sure that the bad apples have a harder time, or that they, like I said, they just comply to the level that we expect everyone else to, that they're not doing right now. So I would love to have those discussions with the landlords and say, what are your challenges? What are your concerns? Where's the problems? And we have the tools available to help them in their business as well. Yes, ma'am.
I am the owner of 2612 Gabriel in Zion.
Okay.
Okay, my place, I keep it very nice. The big problem I'm seeing the whole block is that the tenants, they throw garbage on the ground. Is there any way we have to give them a fine to the tenants, not just the landlord? It's not fair, because I keep my place spotless, okay? And then I'll have a person that is next building or two buildings and bring the garbage at my place, and I see the documents, that's theirs.
Right.
They should fine these people. It's not fair for the landlord.
I would ask, that's not necessarily a home rule question. I would ask that you reach out to Commissioner McKinney or Director Ianson in the building department,
Okay.
and they'd be able to work with you directly on how to address those. There may be fines already, there may be tickets outstanding.
For the tenants.
Yeah,
And
so,
there comes a lot of money over there too. Give them $100 or more.
right, we're tied in what we can't charge for fees and tickets, but check with the building department and they'd be able to help you try and address that
Will home
concern.
rule change anything about that situation? Because what I hear you saying, and as what you have said, is that it's the tenant that's the issue, not the landlord. And we've said that home rule would allow us a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more teeth to hold the landlords accountable. But what about the good landlords? So would home rule allow for anything to change about that situation?
Yeah, I mean, Zion is a beautiful city, but I can't believe that some people, they don't respect. I mean, I have Mumberline, Antioch, you could eat on the ground, on the grass, and here, what is this? I just don't get it. So we have to push more on the tenants.
That's right, not the landlord. The ones that are
Let them
actually
pay.
doing the
Right.
crime. And that was my question exactly. Would you like to either answer it for her or me? Because would home rule help her with that?
Well, and that's gonna have to be something that we'll sit down with the landlords. I'd love to give you my card and talk about it afterwards, but, and try and figure out how to partner with the landlords and say what efforts are you taking to try and address this with your tenants? Why are they not responding? Are there things that we could do? Home rule would allow us, again, the state we're allowed to do whatever we have to, as long as the state says you can, and doesn't specifically say you can't. So we can implement referendum ordinances, whatever, based on what your challenges are in dealing with these tenants to address those issues. I mean, we're not gonna willy-nilly just put ordinances in place addressing things, but if there's, I mean, that's your property as well. We want to make sure that it's upkept. Like I said, I would hope landlords look at that as an investment, and if they're having challenges with tenants, what is the answer? How do we address that? What steps have you taken, not you specifically, but what steps have the landlords taken to address those issues with the tenants? Why is it being ignored? Why is it repeating? How can we use that authority to help the landlords clean that up?
Tenants have more respect for policeman departments and the city of Zion than the landlord. I straight them up, but it costs me $2,000 every time I see, if one of my tenants throws something on the ground and she cussed me out, I got her numbered. I throw her out, or I do not renew the lease, okay?
Well, again, we're dealing, go ahead.
Every time I get the policemen involved, the city of Zion, bang, they listen. But they don't, that's why we need more enforcement of the policemen, Zion. We need these people.
And you have to be picky on the front end about who you let come in.
It doesn't matter, I got the best.
But to your point, these are things that's what I was trying to address when we're at a reactionary standpoint. These are all things, and I see it all the time, and I see comments from people saying, well, the city needs to expand these services and do more enforcement, or the city needs to do more with streets and potholes, or the city needs to do more. And we're at a point of we can't do more with what we have. I don't disagree with you. That's what's needed to try and turn this around. We're also talking, again, differences in landlord mentalities. Landlords that address this with their tenants, that they say you're constantly out there overflowing the dumpster or putting garbage in the alley, or that's fine. But the absentee landlord who may never see the property but once a year, they're not as engaged and they don't care as much about the community. So the ones that get out there and tell their tenants clean up and hold them accountable, I don't worry about them. That's not the issue that we're trying to address here.
Also, one of the tools that we were trying to employ to address some of the tenants that have continued issues, we had a nuisance abatement program that we put in place that is being refined. If there's an incident in your neighborhood or at a house or a building, it's the same person that has these infractions, they're called, the police are called, I want to say it's three times in 180 days, I think.
In 180 days, then that allows that tenant to be removed, and they can't rent Zion again. So we're finding that, and this allows us, the home rule would allow us to deal with some of the safety issues for our neighborhood, the crime issues, and some of the lack of caring. Everyone here, as I'm hearing, we have the same agenda in terms of making this a safe, it's a beautiful city. And so we have to continue to collaborate and talk about what the issues are so that we can come up with collaborative efforts to resolve them. And some of the issues, some of the statutes of home rule will allow us to do that.
Well, I said they should find the landlord, the bad landlord, and they should find the tenant, not just the bad or whatever, the landlord. That's not fair. Both.
Yes.
Last time, thank you for indulging all the questions
Oh, sure.
and comments. The gentleman here, and thank you again for your service, made a good point that we're being asked to exchange some civil liberties for, we don't know exactly what, but I would respond that that's the nature of government. We're going to be under somebody's thumb. Right now, it seems like we're under the state of Illinois' authority. What they're asking for is a little wiggle room, and I'd rather be under the thumb of a group like this that gives transparency like this, that I have easy access to, and under somebody's thumb that I don't have access to. And we're not gonna, as imperfect as these meetings are, we're not gonna get anything like this from the state or federal government. You know, even though they don't have a plan worked out, I'm a little bit okay with that, because you don't have the authority yet. And I think many of us would be frustrated if you spend hours and hours making plans for something that's just turning out to be wishful thinking if you don't get the authority. So what I hear them asking is, we have some ideas that we'd like to pursue. People, can we pursue it? Can we get this authority? And then I think we'll keep us apprised of that. But we're going to be under somebody's thumb either way. And I do appreciate the accountability and transparency. And it's also incumbent upon us who attended these meetings to go in and tell other people, because people have to cast an informed ballot. And they're not here maybe because of availability, maybe because they don't trust these meetings, I don't know. So we have to go and tell people what we've learned from here.
Thank you.
I will now put my
Great
soapbox away.
website. If anybody's interested, where you can, you know, I eliminate a lot of the problems on the front end, because what you do is you send them to the website, you have them pay the $40. They're not gonna waste the $40 if they're not gonna qualify. And it's gonna check 4 things. It's gonna check their income, their background criminal records, their credit score, and I forget the 4th thing. But anyway, runs them through.
That's a tool for landlords to be able to use?
Yep.
Okay.
And, you know, a lot of people won't pay that $40 if they know they're not gonna pass. And if every landlord would just use that website, they would eliminate a lot of bad tenants right out of the gate.
Well, I would say mine gotta be 90% okay. If I find one rotten apple, they gotta go.
And like I said, I wish everybody had that mentality. We wouldn't be having this discussion. So, are there any more questions as it relates to home rule? Again, on our website, we do have a home rule FAQ section that has a lot of the information that's here. Also, the meetings are being recorded. The first one was recorded and available on there. This one will be, as well as the third. There's also some council meetings where discussions, we had the attorneys come and present about home rule. All of that's being posted on the website. To your point, Chris, we're trying to be as transparent as possible and trying to get the information. I'm sorry?
What if we don't have Facebook?
Do you have access to the internet at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the City of Zion's website.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a home rule FAQ section, and all of that information's there. It's not just Facebook. Were there any questions on that?
And also, if there's anyone who had questions but may not actually wanted to stand up and ask them in this type of setting, I have a notebook, I have some paper and pen if you want to write your question down along with your contact information. David will be more than happy to contact you with the response to your question.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We have this open till 2 o'clock. I'll be happy to hang around and address any additional questions that may come to mind.